Some stories don't begin with victory. They begin with pain. A little girl walked to school every day with hope in her heart, until someone tried to take that hope away. One fall, one moment, one act of cruelty that could have broken her forever. But what no one expected was that a single teacher was watching. And what he did next didn't just save one child, it changed an entire school. This is the story of a little girl who fell, but stood up stronger. The story of a teacher who refused to stay silent. And a sunrise that proved, even after the darkest night, light always returns. Welcome back to Hub Stories. I've truly missed you all. Thank you so much for staying with me. Your love and support mean everything. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring even more emotional, powerful, and life-changing stories. And trust me, you definitely don't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's continue the story. Her scream echoed through the silent hallway. The first bell hadn't even rung yet, but Westwood Academy already smelled of polished floors, fresh chalk, and the faint sweetness of morning pastries from the cafeteria. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, forming long golden shapes on the staircase that connected the lower hall to the upper classrooms. 8-year-old Amara Williams walked carefully down those stairs, hugging her sketchbook to her chest. She wore a faded pink sweater, its sleeves slightly too long for her small arms. Her braids were tied with yellow ribbons, her favorite color. She had spent all night drawing a sunrise for her art project, a picture filled with bright oranges and reds. It wasn't perfect, but it felt special. It felt like hope. She planned to show her teacher early so she could hang it on the classroom board. Maybe today she hoped someone might notice her talent. Maybe today someone might sit with her at lunch. But before she reached the middle of the staircase, she heard it. Whispers. Soft at first, then sharper. There she is. Why does she always look so happy? It's weird. You know she's on a scholarship, right? Amara didn't turn. She kept walking. She always kept walking. That was her rule. If she ignored them, maybe they'd ignore her too. But the footsteps behind her grew louder. 2 girls, Alyssa and Brielle, both 12, both dressed in designer jackets, walked with a confidence Amara wished she had. They were the kind of girls people moved out of the way for, the kind of girls teachers complimented, the kind of girls who always got what they wanted. And this morning they wanted trouble. Alyssa smirked as she looked down at Amara's drawing, peeking out from her sketchbook. "What's that?" she asked loudly. "Another one of her ugly pictures?" Brielle laughed, a high, cruel sound that bounced off the staircase walls. "Maybe she's drawing food. She doesn't get much at home, does she?" she said, her voice dripping with nastiness. Amara kept her eyes on the stairs. One step, another step, just a few more and she would be safe on the landing. But her breath began to tremble. She wished the hallway wasn't so empty. She wished anyone was walking behind them. She wished she wasn't alone. "Hey," Alyssa barked. "We're talking to you." Amara hugged her drawing tighter. She didn't turn around. She didn't speak. She didn't want any trouble. Her mother always told her, "You are not what they say about you, baby. Just keep walking." She kept walking. Brielle scoffed. "Oh, she's ignoring us again. She thinks she's better than us." "Let's fix her attitude," Alyssa whispered. And then, 2 hands, a sudden shove. A moment of pure, weightless terror. Amara's foot slipped. Her arms flew up. Her sketchbook burst open like a trapped bird released too soon. The world spun. Her body hit the stairs. Her elbow scraped the edge. Her knee twisted painfully. And then, she fell all the way down. Her scream echoed through the hallway before fading into a sharp, breathless silence. Her drawing fluttered through the air, landing in pieces beside her, its colors smudged, torn, broken. Just like she felt in that moment. Amara lay still for a second, blinking back tears. Her chest burned. Her throat tightened. Her palms stung where they had scraped the floor. Then laughter. Not soft, nervous laughter. Cold, satisfied laughter. The 2 girls stood at the top of the staircase, looking down at her as though they were watching a movie. "Oh my God," Brielle chuckled. "She actually fell." Alyssa snorted. "She should watch where she's going." Neither girl rushed down to check on her. Neither apologized. Neither cared. They didn't even run away. They didn't have to. They knew the school wouldn't hold them responsible. They knew their parents' money spoke louder than Amara's pain. They knew nothing would happen. Amara pushed herself up slowly, biting her lip to stop from crying. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction. The tears welled anyway. Her leg throbbed. Her elbow bled. Her drawing, her beautiful sunrise, was ruined. She reached out with shaky fingers and picked up the biggest piece. The sun she drew last night was smudged into a messy orange streak. Her heart squeezed painfully. She whispered to herself, "Why me? I didn't do anything." But she wasn't as alone as she thought. At the far end of the hallway, half hidden behind a supply cart, a man in a janitor's uniform tightened his grip on his broom. His dark eyes had watched everything. The shove, the full, the cruelty. He took one step forward, jaw clenching. No one knew his name. No one knew his face. But the world would one day recognize him as Victor Hale, the secret billionaire who never announced where he went or whom he helped. And in that moment, as he watched a little black girl struggle to her feet, he made a silent vow. He would not let this moment break her. He would not let this moment go unpunished. Victor Hale's broom moved in slow, steady strokes across the polished hallway floor. To anyone passing by, he looked like an ordinary janitor beginning his morning shift. Quiet, unnoticed, forgettable. But Victor was anything but ordinary. Behind the plain uniform, behind the cheap plastic name tag that read VH, lived a man whose decisions could shift markets, build cities, or topple corporations. A man whose name floated in business magazines wrapped in mystery. The invisible billionaire. The man who disappeared from his own success. The ghost who owns half the tech world. Victor hated those nicknames. He didn't disappear, he simply preferred to watch life from behind the curtain rather than from the center of the stage. Some billionaires collected yachts, some collected cars. Victor collected truth. He had seen far too many people hide behind money, behind fake smiles, behind locked doors. He believed the only way to help the world was to understand it. Not from news channels or company reports, but from the ground level, where real people lived and struggled. So twice a year, Victor vanished from his penthouse, put on a uniform, and blended into the everyday world. He worked as a bus station cleaner, a grocery stocker, a hospital volunteer, anywhere he could witness unfiltered human behavior. This year, he chose Westwood Academy, a prestigious school he secretly funded, a school he wanted to observe closely. And today, his mission became painfully clear. He saw everything. The moment Alyssa and Brielle approached the little girl, Victor's broom stilled. Something in him sharpened. The same instinct he had when negotiating billion-dollar deals, an awareness of danger, of imbalance, of unfairness. He watched Amara walk carefully, silently praying she would make it to the bottom of the stairs. He watched the girls whisper, smirk, and step closer. And when they shoved her, when her small body flipped forward, like a rag doll, something inside, Victor snapped. He dropped his broom. For a split second, he almost ran toward her, almost intervened, almost grabbed the girls by the wrist and demanded answers, demanded remorse, demanded humanity. But he didn't. He forced himself to stay still, because emotional reactions won battles, but strategy won wars, and Victor Hale was a man who knew how to win wars without ever raising his voice. He waited, he watched, he studied. When the cruel laughter stopped echoing and the girls walked away, Victor finally stepped forward. Amara was on her knees, trying desperately to piece together the torn fragments of her drawing. Her small hands trembled. She kept looking at the ruined sunrise as though it were a friend she had failed to protect. Victor's footsteps were soft, almost hesitant, but his heart hammered with a fierce, unexpected protectiveness. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. Amara quickly wiped under her eyes and shook her head. "I'm okay," she whispered, even though her voice was cracked and her elbow was bleeding. Victor lowered himself to one knee beside her. His movements were slow, careful, like he was approaching something fragile. He picked up one of the torn pieces of her drawing. The orange sun was smeared, but still bright. "You made this?" he asked. She nodded timidly. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice softer than she expected a grown man's voice could be. "It looks like hope." Amara stared at him, unsure whether he was teasing her or telling the truth. Adults didn't usually compliment her drawings. They didn't usually notice her at all. "Thank you," she whispered, but her eyes shined with the faintest courage. Victor felt something tighten in his chest. Not pity, no. It was recognition. He saw his younger self in her, a lonely child who had once sat in hallways, pretending everything was fine while bruises hid under long sleeves. A boy who learned early that some kids were protected by their parents' money, and some kids weren't protected by anyone. He knew that look in Amara's eyes, the look of a child who had been hurt before, the look of someone who didn't expect justice. Victor inhaled slowly. This wasn't just a school incident. This wasn't just playground cruelty. This was a wake-up call. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amara," she whispered. "That's a strong name," he said. "Do you know what it means?" She shook her head. "It means grace and miracle," Victor said. "And you are both." A small smile pulled at her lips even through the pain. Victor stood and extended his hand to help her up. She hesitated, then placed her tiny fingers in his palm. As she rose to her feet, he made a silent promise, a promise forged from the broken pieces of a sunrise drawing. "I will not let what happened to you be forgotten. I will not allow this school to ignore cruelty. And I will not allow you to feel small ever again." He wasn't just a witness. He was about to become the storm that changed everything. The walk to the principal's office felt longer than any hallway Amara had ever walked through. Every step hurt. Her knee throbbed each time her foot touched the ground, and her elbow stung sharply where skin had scraped away. But she didn't complain. She never complained. Complaining only made people sigh and say she was too sensitive. Victor walked slightly behind her, still wearing his janitor uniform, pushing his supply cart slowly like nothing was unusual, but his eyes stayed glued to her small, trembling shoulders. He noticed how she hugged her damaged drawing to her chest like it was a shield she refused to drop. The staff passing them barely glanced at her injury. One even muttered, "Kids run too fast," without stopping. Victor felt a cold, heavy anger settle inside him. When they reached the principal's door, dark wood, too shiny, too grand for a school meant for children, Amara hesitated. Is she going to be mad at me?" Amara asked quietly. Victor crouched down a little so he was closer to her height. "Why would she be mad?" Because they always say I start things," she whispered, looking at her shoes. Victor inhaled deeply, slow and steady, fighting the urge to rip the entire door off its hinges. How many times had this child walked into this office and walked out with blame instead of protection? He knocked gently. A sharp voice answered, "Come in." Principal Harding sat behind her large desk. A steaming mug of coffee beside a stack of student files. Glass awards lined her shelves. Excellence in Education, Leadership Award, Parent Choice Recognition, but none of those awards reflected in her eyes. Her eyes were tired, uninterested, almost cold. Her gaze flicked up at Amara first, then at the janitor behind her, and her expression shifted into mild irritation. "Mr. Hale, isn't it? This is not the time for cleaning. Staff to be interrupting the morning schedule." She tapped her pen impatiently. "What's the issue?" Victor didn't answer. He simply nodded at Amara. With a trembling breath, Amara stepped forward. I fell down the stairs," she began softly. "Two girls. They pushed me." The principal didn't even blink. "Who?" she asked flatly, though it didn't sound like a question born from concern, just formality. "Alyssa and Brielle." There was a pause. "A long one." Principal Harding slowly sat back in her chair. "Amara," she began, switching to a tone adults often use when they plan to dismiss a child's pain. "I'm sure it wasn't intentional. Falling happens. Children lose balance." "I didn't lose balance," Amara whispered. "They pushed." Principal Harding lifted a hand. "Enough. Those two girls are from respectable families. Their behavior is always exemplary." She forced a thin smile. "Sometimes when we get emotional, we imagine things stronger than they happened." Victor felt heat rise in his chest. Respectable families. Exemplary behavior. Imagine things. This wasn't just ignorance, this was protection. Shielding the privileged, silencing the vulnerable. He stepped forward slowly. "Are you suggesting," he said quietly, "that this child injured herself for attention?" Principal Harding straightened suddenly. I'm suggesting there's no proof of wrongdoing. And unless a teacher witnessed the incident, I cannot take disciplinary action." "We don't need a teacher," Victor said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that silences rooms. I witnessed it. The principal blinked, surprised. You? Her gaze assessed him again. Brown uniform, cheap shoes, dusty broom. A janitor? She added, not bothering to hide her disbelief. Victor tilted his head. Does honesty depend on job titles here? Her cheeks flushed. That's not what I meant. Good, he replied calmly. Because truth doesn't wear a uniform. Amara stared up at him, eyes wide, as though she was witnessing something she'd only dreamed adults could do. Defend her. Principal Harding swallowed, then forced another smile. Mr. Hale, perhaps we should follow proper channels. If you want to file an incident report. Victor cut her off. No, he said softly. I want accountability. She froze. I want this child taken seriously, he continued. I want her safety prioritized. And I want the truth to matter more than the social standing of the students involved. The principal gripped her pen so tightly it almost snapped. Sir, I don't know who you think you are, but… Victor stepped closer and placed a small white card on her desk. She glanced at it, her face drained of all color. Victor Hale, founder and CEO, Hale Tech Corporation, primary benefactor, Westwood Academy. Silence swallowed the room. She looked at him again. Really looked. The man she thought was a janitor, funded half her school. I'll be observing everything here from today, Victor said. Personally. Principal Harding nodded stiffly, terrified. Yes, of course. As Victor guided Amara out of the office, he didn't smile. He didn't need to. A shift had begun. A line had been drawn. And for the first time in a long time, Amara didn't walk the hallway alone. The next morning, the sky over Westwood Academy hung heavy with gray clouds. The school courtyard buzzed with chatter, backpacks swinging, sneakers hitting pavement, voices calling out. But beneath the surface, something else rippled. Whispers. Not about tests, not about sports, not about weekend plans. Whispers about him. The janitor who wasn't really a janitor. The man who confronted the principal without raising his voice. Teachers exchanged confused glances. Students repeated rumors in excited bursts. Staff pretended nothing was different, but they all felt it. Something in the building had shifted. Meanwhile, Victor Hale pushed his rolling cart along the hallway with calm, measured steps. He was dressed in the same janitor uniform, but everyone who saw him suddenly stood a little straighter. Teachers greeted him politely. Students nervously made room. Only two people didn't look nervous. Alyssa and Brielle. Instead, they looked annoyed. Why's everyone staring at us? Brielle whispered as they walked. Who cares? Alyssa scoffed. We didn't do anything wrong. But her fingers kept tightening around her phone. Every few seconds, she glanced over her shoulder, toward Victor. Because deep down, even spoiled children sense when the air changes, when their safety net begins to tear. Victor noticed everything. He didn't storm toward them. He didn't demand apologies. He didn't show anger. He simply watched, not with intimidation, but with clarity, with the eyes of a man trained to read people like open books. By the end of the first hour, Victor had observed enough. Alyssa walked with her chin high, her backpack swinging behind her like she owned the hall. Her voice dripped confidence, but her movements were sharp, restless. She nudged smaller children out of her path, smirked at younger ones, glared at anyone who didn't immediately look away. Brielle followed closely, acting as Alyssa's echo, laughing when she laughed, mocking who she mocked, copying every expression like she was desperate to belong. Victor didn't see two villains. He saw two children shaped by broken homes and high expectations. Two children whose parents bought reputation instead of giving affection. Two children who had learned early that dominance was easier than kindness. But seeing the roots of cruelty didn't excuse it. And Victor knew this wasn't an isolated incident. During lunch, Victor quietly reviewed the school's behavior reports. At least 9 complaints involving Alyssa and Brielle had been filed in the last year. 9. But every report had the same note scribbled in red ink. Unable to confirm. Insufficient evidence. The words infuriated him. Insufficient evidence, he whispered, tapping the paper. Or insufficient courage? He moved through the school slowly, collecting small pieces of truth, anxious glances, whispers from younger kids, stiff silence from older ones. When he approached a boy eating alone, the child's shoulders tensed. I didn't say anything, the boy blurted. Victor crouched down gently. You're not in trouble, he said. I just want to understand. The boy's eyes darted around. They pushed a sixth grader into the lockers last month, he whispered. He didn't tell because they said they'd make it worse. A girl at a nearby table leaned closer. They made one girl hide in a bathroom for nearly an hour, she said softly. They said if she came out, they'd ruin her reputation. Another student interrupted. They make fun of kids' clothes. Their hair, everything. One by one, stories spilled out. Voices grew braver. Truth grew louder. Fear shrank. Victor listened to every word, every tremor, every painful memory. He didn't rush. He didn't judge. He wrote down details exactly as the children said them. He was building a map of the truth. And the map pointed to a very clear conclusion. Alyssa and Brielle weren't just bullies. They were protected bullies, enabled by adults who refused to see anything they didn't want to. That evening, Victor requested a meeting with the girls' parents. He didn't tell them who he was. He didn't send an official letter. He simply asked them to come to discuss an incident. They arrived looking offended before they even sat down. Alyssa's mother, with her designer purse and icy smile, crossed her arms. Brielle's father, tall and impatient, scrolled his phone with irritation. "What's this about?" he asked without looking up. Victor didn't sit. He kept sweeping, broom gently gliding over the floor. "Your daughter's hurt another child," he said simply. Alyssa's mother rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake." "Kids push." Brielle's father laughed under his breath. "Who are you again? A janitor?" Victor lifted his eyes, not angry, not smug, simply steady. "A janitor who saw more truth in a hallway than the school has seen in a year," he said. Their faces stiffened. Before they could respond, Victor added, "Children push only those they believe can't push back." Silence. The parents looked at him for the first time not as a janitor, but as a man who knew things they didn't want to face, as a man who wasn't scared of their wealth, as a man who truly saw their children. The meeting ended in tight jaws and stiff shoulders. Not because Victor threatened them, but because he didn't have to. They realized something. Their daughter's world, the one built on immunity and privilege, was cracking, and the man sweeping the floors was the one shaking the foundation. The next morning arrived with a strange electricity in the air. Students whispered in the hallways. Teachers hurried through the corridors with uneasy expressions, and the principal looked like she hadn't slept all night. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it, even if they didn't know why. But Amara knew. She sat quietly in the last row of the auditorium, swinging her small feet under the chair. In her hands, she held a fresh drawing she had made the night before. A sunrise just like the one she had drawn for Victor on her first day of school, but this one glowed brighter, higher, fuller. She didn't understand why she drew it that way. But it felt right. When the entire school had been seated, students, teachers, janitors, office staff, and even some of the parents who had rushed over after receiving a sudden message, the lights dimmed. The curtain on the stage slowly opened. And there he was. Victor Hale. Not the man with a mop. Not the quiet janitor in a faded uniform. Not the invisible figure everyone ignored. He stood beneath the stage lights, wearing a tailored black suit. A calm expression on his face, as if he had carried this truth for a long time. Gasps spread through the room like a wave. "That's the billionaire," someone whispered. "He owns the tech parks downtown. I saw his face on TV last month." Teachers exchanged shocked looks. Students leaned forward in disbelief. And in the front row, the principal's jaw dropped so far you'd think gravity had grabbed it. Victor stepped up to the podium, his presence so composed that the entire room fell silent in seconds. He adjusted the microphone slightly. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm yet powerful. "I'm sure many of you recognize me as Victor Hale." A few heads nodded nervously. He continued, "Most of you didn't recognize me yesterday, when I was mopping the cafeteria floor." A murmur swept across the crowd as the reality hit them. They had spoken around him, ignored him, walked past him, judged him, without ever knowing the truth. Victor paused, letting the lesson settle. "But today," he said gently, "I'm not standing here as a billionaire. I'm standing here as a witness to something painful, something that should never happen inside a school." Amara lowered her gaze. Her hands trembled lightly around her drawing. Victor looked across the auditorium, scanning the students' faces. "Yesterday I saw a little girl push down a flight of stairs. I saw fear in her eyes. I saw pain in her mother's face. And I saw something I hoped I would never see again in my lifetime. Cruelty born from ignorance. A hush settled over the hall, but Victor did not raise his voice. He didn't glare. He didn't point fingers. A school, he said, is not just a building where children learn math and history. No, a school is the heart of a society. It teaches us how to treat each other. What we allow here, what we ignore here, becomes what we accept everywhere. Teachers shifted uncomfortably. Some students lowered their eyes, and somewhere in the middle rows 2 girls sat frozen, their faces turning bright red, their hands tightly gripping the arms of their chairs. Victor continued, "Every one of us has a responsibility. Kindness is not a small thing. It's not optional. It's not something you give only to people who look like you, or talk like you, or dress like you." He looked out at the room, his eyes deep with sincerity. "Kindness," he said, "is what makes a person human." The auditorium was silent enough to hear a pin drop.
"No child," he said firmly, "should ever fear walking in these hallways."
No teacher should overlook cruelty, because it's easier to pretend it isn't happening. And no community should allow a single child, no matter her background, her skin color, or her story, to feel less than worthy. The principal's eyes filled with shame. Several teachers glanced toward Amara, realizing for the first time how small, how fragile she truly looked sitting alone in the back row. Victor stepped away from the podium and moved to the front of the stage, closer to the students. "You may think power comes from being popular," he said, "or being wealthy or being stronger than someone else. But real power, real strength, comes from empathy, from having the courage to protect someone who can't protect themselves." Amara's eyes glistened. Victor met her gaze from across the room and gave her a small, reassuring nod. Then he ended with a sentence that rippled through every heart in that auditorium. "If you cannot choose to be anything else in life, choose to be kind." The world already has enough of everything else. For a long moment, no one clapped. No one moved. Everyone just sat there, processing the weight of what they had heard. And in that quiet, Amara felt something she had not felt since the fall. Hope. Because for the first time, someone powerful had spoken for her. Someone had reminded the entire school who she truly was. A child who deserved love, safety, and dignity. A sunrise rising again, brighter than ever. The principal's office had never felt so small. Normally it was a place of authority. Wooden panels, award plaques, neat stacks of files, but today, standing in front of Victor Hale, the most influential man to ever step into the building, it felt like the walls themselves were listening. The principal sat stiffly behind her desk, her fingers trembling as she clasped them together. She kept stealing glances at Victor, unsure whether she should speak or stay silent. Victor didn't sit. He stood tall, hands behind his back, calm but firm, like a man used to making decisions that changed the course of companies, cities, and now a school. "Thank you for meeting again," the principal whispered. Victor nodded once and closed the door behind him. "This will be a short meeting," he said, "but an important one." He walked toward her desk and placed a thick, well-organized file on top of it. The principal's eyes widened at the neatly labeled sections. Recorded incidents, student reports, teacher observations, security footage timelines, past complaints, previous pattern of bullying, materials. Far more thorough than anything the school had ever collected. "This school," Victor began, "will not protect bullies anymore." The principal swallowed hard. She had been expecting anger, disappointment, maybe even threats. But Victor's voice remained steady, not loud, not harsh, just undeniably firm. "I'm appointing a new disciplinary board," he continued. "Independent, transparent, nothing hidden. No favoritism, no excuses." "A new board?" she repeated, stunned. "Yes," Victor said. "A board chosen from community leaders, child psychologists, and neutral educators from outside this school. People who do not owe favors, who won't be pressured by influential parents, who won't allow harm to go unnoticed." The principal exhaled slowly. "I admit, we've made mistakes." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Mistakes happen. Repeating them is a choice." She lowered her eyes. He stepped closer and opened the file he brought. Inside were printed photos, typed statements, and several USB drives. "And those 2 girls?" she finally asked, voice shaking slightly. Victor slid the evidence packet toward her. "The problem isn't only what they did yesterday. It's what they've been allowed to do for months." The principal's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. There were screenshots of group chats where the girls mocked other students, A video clip showing one of them shoving a smaller student weeks earlier. A teacher's note complaining about repeated rude behavior that had gone unaddressed, and statements from classmates anonymous, but truthful, describing how the girls intentionally targeted students who looked different, talked different, or came from families with less money. The principal looked up with tears forming. "I didn't know it was this bad." "You didn't look," Victor replied gently. He wasn't attacking her. He wasn't insulting her. He was stating a fact the school had avoided acknowledging. The principal nodded slowly, accepting it. "So," Victor continued, "this is what needs to happen." He spoke clearly, deliberately, leaving no space for misunderstanding. "They need counseling," he said first. "Not just a one-time meeting. A full guided program with a licensed therapist who specializes in harmful behavior patterns in children." The principal nodded. "They need community service," he added. "Not to embarrass them, but to teach them empathy. Let them help younger students. Let them clean up school spaces. Let them be part of rebuilding what they broke." Again she nodded. "And they need suspension," he said. "Time away to reflect, not as punishment, but as a boundary. A line they crossed that must be acknowledged." The principal straightened, surprised. "You're not asking for expulsion?" "No," Victor replied firmly. "Expulsion teaches fear, but I want them to learn responsibility. These are children, Principal Reyes, not criminals. If we throw them away, we become the same as the problem we're trying to fix." That sentence struck her deeply. Victor stepped back, folding his arms, his expression softening. "This is not about revenge. It's about growth. Every child deserves a chance to become better." For the first time since the incident, the principal lifted her head with genuine respect. "You're right," she said quietly. "You're absolutely right." Victor nodded, satisfied. "And one more thing," he added. The principal braced herself. "The school," Victor said, "must apologize publicly, not to me. To Amara." She blinked. "To the student?" "Not just the student," Victor corrected. "To the little girl who was failed by an entire system. She deserves to hear the words that could have changed everything. We're sorry. We should have protected you." The principal exhaled shakily. "We'll do it. I'll arrange it today." He finally allowed himself a small smile. "Good, because accountability isn't humiliation. It's healing." As he turned to leave, the principal rose from her chair. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, "thank you for not giving up on this school." Victor paused at the door. "I'm not here to destroy it," he said. "I'm here to help it become the place it should have always been." And for the first time in years, the principal believed change might actually be possible. The art room was quiet as the afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting warm golden stripes across the tables. Most students had already gone home, leaving behind faint smells of paint and clay. Brushes lay drying on racks. Half-finished drawings were pinned to corkboards, and silence filled the space in a way that felt almost protective. In the middle of the room, sitting at a small wooden table too big for her tiny frame, was Amara. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was simply quiet. Her hands rested on a sheet of paper, where a painting of a sunrise glowed softly in watercolor strokes, soft pinks, gentle oranges, promising yellows. She had been working on it for almost an hour, adding layer after layer, as if trying to paint hope back into her life one color at a time. Victor stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her with a tenderness even he didn't know he carried. He could see something in her, the bravery, the fragility, the resilience, something that reminded him of a chapter in his own childhood he never talked about. He finally stepped inside. "Hey," he said softly. Amara looked up, startled at first, then relaxing when she recognized him. "Hi, Mr. Victor." He pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. He made sure not to crowd her, not to rush her. He spoke with the gentleness of someone approaching a wounded bird. "How are you feeling?" Amara shrugged, a tiny motion. "Better?" But her voice carried the weight of a child who had seen too much for her age. Victor folded his hands on the table. "It's okay if you're not completely better yet," he said. "Healing doesn't happen in one day." Amara didn't respond right away. She dipped her brush into a small cup of water, watching the colors swirl. Then she whispered, "Everyone keeps asking me if I'm okay. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Victor told her. "You just have to breathe and be gentle with yourself." She finally looked up at him, really looked, and saw something. she hadn't seen in most adults. Understanding. You know, Victor continued, you're stronger than you think. Amara frowned. Because I didn't cry? Victor shook his head slowly, smiling. No, crying doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. You're strong because even after someone tried to break your spirit, you still made something beautiful. He pointed toward her painting, the brilliant sunrise that seemed to shine even in the dim room. Amara glanced at it, her expression softening. Her small fingers brushed the edge of the paper. It's because sunrises. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Sunrises mean things get better. Victor felt something tighten in his chest. This little girl had endured cruelty, fear,
humiliation, and yet she still believed in beginnings, in beauty, in hope.
Even after dark nights? Victor asked gently. Yeah. Her voice was barely above a whisper. My mom says the night doesn't last forever, that the sun always comes back, so I draw it to remind myself. Victor leaned back slightly, his heart twisting. Children shouldn't have to remind themselves to hope. Children shouldn't have to heal alone. He reached out, but not to touch the painting. He touched the table beside her hand, carefully as if asking permission. Amara, he said, you have a gift, and a heart that sees light even when others try to cover it. She blinked, and for the first time all day her eyes softened. Victor inhaled deeply, the words forming naturally. I'd like to help you draw more sunrises, he said. And not just on paper. Amara tilted her head, curious. What do you mean? I mean, he said gently, I want to help make your world brighter. You've been brave alone for too long. Let me help. She stared at him for a long moment. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not a teacher, not a friend, not an adult besides her mother. She searched his face slowly, like she was trying to decide if she could trust what she was hearing. Finally, she nodded. It was small. It was quiet. But to Victor, it felt like witnessing the sun rise in real time. He smiled, warm, relieved, full-hearted. Then we'll start with this painting, he said, pointing to the sunrise. You and me. And we'll keep adding colors until it feels like a whole new day. Amara looked back at the painting as if seeing it for the first time. Her shoulders relaxed. The air around her seemed lighter, safer. And for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Truly seen. Not as a victim. Not as a target. But as a little girl with a bright soul and a rising light inside her. Victor didn't heal her all at once. No one could. But in that small art room, on that ordinary afternoon, something began. A quiet, gentle, powerful healing. The kind that grows. The kind that strengthens. The kind that turns dark nights into sunrises. Months slipped by like pages turning in a book, each chapter brighter than the one before. The school that once carried whispers of fear, bullying, and hidden cruelty slowly began to transform. Quietly at first, then boldly, then beautifully. And at the center of that transformation was Victor Hale. He didn't just donate money and leave. He didn't just make speeches and disappear. He showed up every week, every meeting, every planning session, like a man determined not to change one life, but all of them. He funded a full anti-bullying program, not just in Amara's school, but eventually across the entire district. He hired counselors, trained teachers, supported peer mentors, and even created anonymous reporting systems, so no child would ever feel alone again. He didn't stop there. Victor expanded the art department, bringing in new supplies, new instructors, and workshops with real artists. The school hallways, once plain and dull, slowly filled with vibrant student artwork, pieces of joy, pieces of healing, pieces of expression that had never been nurtured before. Scholarships were offered to children who came from difficult circumstances, kids who had big dreams but no support, kids like Amara, and the school, once dim and cold, began to glow with life. Amara thrived. Her footsteps became lighter, her smiles became brighter, her voice became stronger. Her drawings, once private worlds of hope, were now displayed proudly along the main hallway. Every passerby paused to admire her colors, her imagination, her quiet brilliance. Teachers praised her kindness, not just her talent. She helped younger students with their art projects. She cheered for classmates during presentations. She never forgot how it felt to be small, frightened, and alone, so she made sure no one around her felt the same. Little by little, students began sitting with her during lunch. Not because she asked, not because Victor was famous, but because she made people feel safe. The same girl who once sat alone at a cafeteria table now found herself surrounded by laughter, friends, and warmth. One sunny afternoon, long after the shadows of the past had faded, Amara walked down the same staircase where her life had almost changed forever. Her heart didn't beat fast anymore. Her hands didn't tremble. Her knees didn't weaken. Instead, she felt steady, brave, whole. On either side of her were two new friends, Mia and Jonah, holding her hands as they descended the steps. It wasn't because she needed help. It was because they wanted to walk with her. They wanted her to know she was not alone. When they reached the bottom, Victor was waiting. Not with bodyguards, not with reporters. Just him, casual, calm, warm, standing exactly where he needed to be. Amara let go of her friend's hands and ran toward him with a grin so wide it could have lit the whole building. "Mr. Victor," she called out. "I finished a new drawing. Do you want to see it?" He crouched slightly so their eyes were level. "Always." Amara opened her sketchbook as carefully as if she were revealing a treasure. Inside was a drawing of the school, but not as it had been. No broken railings. No shadows in the corners. No fear hiding behind the walls. The picture showed the school bright, colorful, and full of life. Children holding hands, art decorating walls, teachers smiling, sunlight pouring through windows like hope itself. "It's a picture of how this place feels now," Amara whispered. "Safe." Victor's eyes softened as he looked at the drawing, absorbing every detail, every color, every message she poured into it. "It is safe," he said gently. But then he placed a hand over her small one. "Because you helped change it." Amara blinked up at him. "Me?" "Yes," he said, smiling in that rare way he reserved only for moments that truly mattered. "You, because you didn't stop shining. Because you believed in sunrises even when the night felt long. You reminded this school what kindness looks like." Amara felt her cheeks warm, her heart fluttering in that soft, gentle way that only truth can stir. She looked up the staircase again, not with fear but with gratitude, because that place no longer held pain. It held strength. It held her story, her courage, her rising, and as she stood beside Victor, the girl who once had been pushed down now stood taller than anyone ever expected, not just a survivor, not just a student, but a sunrise in human form, strong, bright, unbroken, lighting up everything around her. A new beginning, and the promise of many more.